Good evening, Julian McBain here, and tonight we are doing, I believe it's my third vlog. And of course, as usual, we're playing Entropia Universe while I do this. I'm currently over by the East Corinth hangars, and I'm hunting some berry clit tonight. So, continuing on my my theme as of late, which has been I've been listening to 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. I know I go on a lot about him, and I talk a lot about philosophy, and the more I listen to him, the more reasonable a lot of what he says sounds. And I know that's, of course, one of those things where it's like, well, yeah, because it's basically been an echo chamber, but, I mean, realistically, that's, if you actually listen to what he's saying and process it, take the time to process a lot of the things he comes up with. And, I mean, he uses a lot of biblical allegory, and whether or not you're into that sort of thing will it might shape how you view what he's saying, but overall it's what's underneath it. He's using it to make a point as opposed to trying to preach. And the point is, depending on the chapter, things like, do something that makes your life have meaning. Or the chapter I kind of want to actually do some analysis on. I'm actually going to do an analysis on this chapter because it really hit me hard. As someone who struggles a lot with things like self-image and trying to remember that, yes, I'm actually worth the effort I put in. One of the chapters, and I'm trying to remember off the top of my head which one it is. I think it's chapter 3. Give me just a second here. I am going to try to quickly locate it so I don't take too much time out of this. No, it's chapter 2. And chapter 2 of 12 Rules for Life is treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. Now, think about that for just a second. And I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers or even say that I have a great grasp of the chapter yet. I'm probably going to that's an audiobook, so quote-unquote rereading the book again, or I might pick up a print copy and slowly read it again, because I'm actually quite the speed reader for the most part, but I've often forced myself to slow down so I can absorb better, because I can get through the whole story fairly quick. I think I plowed through Dune in under a week, but that doesn't mean I'm absorbing it. And for something like this, you really want to absorb what's going on. But treat yourself like someone you're responsible for helping. And that really hit me, because I realized that in just listening to the chapter, a lot of the things that, in my day-to-day life that I do that aren't necessarily beneficial to my well-being. I'm not just talking about, my prolific amounts of video game playing, copious amounts, whatever word you want to use. I play a lot of video games. It's kind of my second job at this point, being a YouTube creator, and you know what? I'm okay with that. But it doesn't mean that I should be doing so to the neglect of my health or other things. And although I haven't been, it did make me kind of take a sharp look at some of the habits I've developed over the course of, say, the last 10 years. Because when or especially not the last few, but the 3 years I lived on my own, and I was a true bachelor. Yes, I had someone for the majority of it, but when you live alone and far away from anyone to help you remember to self-regulate, because in a lot of ways that's what a partner does, whether it's a girlfriend, boyfriend, significant other, or even a roommate to a certain extent will force you to self-regulate, because in a lot of ways there's kind of a social embarrassment if you can't take care of yourself. And if you have someone there to observe you on the regular, you're more likely, I think, to force yourself to do things. And so, I spent the better part of 3 years where I ate a lot of Tostino's pizza rolls. Yeah. Yep. And here's the clincher. This year we discovered I'm lactose sensitive. So just think about that for a second. All that cheese. Ugh. But Anyway, so listening to this chapter, and I almost backed it up to listen to it again, but I wanted to get through the first reading of the book before I went back and did any reanalysis of, or quote unquote rereading of any chapters, because oftentimes the essence of a previous chapter will become even more apparent in a future chapter. Like chapter 4 might have a piece in it that really makes chapter 2 click, so to speak. So I didn't want to... Corona's hunting task. Okay, I'll have to deal with that later. So I really wanted to get through the book and better understand what Dr. Peterson was going after. And as I was thinking about it and reviewing how I deal with things in my life, I decided to come up with some goals for the new year. And I mean, obviously, we're only 3 days in. It's the 3rd of January at this point. This will release on the 5th. But, you know, just as a for instance, one of the goals I have for the end of the year is to cut my drinking back. You know, I have gone nights without alcohol without having any major issues. And so I know I'm not necessarily an alcoholic, but it doesn't mean I want to allow myself to get to the point where that could be a possibility. And so... figures. That's okay. Did they do like a graphics up? Oh no, that's right. I increased the graphics quality on the computer. But so, and I'm not going to go through the whole New Year's resolution horse shit, because frankly, if you make a New Year's resolution, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. I resolve. No, don't resolve, because you're trying to force yourself to do something that you may not even be ready to do or want to do. And you're not ready to reward yourself for doing it, and that's kind of one of the things he gets into. And although I would strongly recommend everyone pick up the book or the audiobook and either read it or listen to it, and the analyses that are part of it, one of the things that you should really take to heart is, you know, by treating yourself like someone you're responsible for, you can do things like come up with, one of the things he mentioned was, and this is going to be a terrible paraphrase, but if you tell yourself if you complete a task, like say cleaning the living room, you know, or maybe something a little more complex, clean the kitchen, the living room, and the bathroom. And then you promise yourself, okay, if I accomplish these 3 tasks, I'll go out to my favorite coffee shop and buy myself a latte or something like that. Too many people will do the task and then justify not buying the latte because it's too expensive. And I'm quoting him here, go out and buy the damn coffee. So one of the things I'm trying to come up with now is I've got these 9 goals for the year. And so now I've got to come up with a system of rewards that I can give myself, yay fragments, in the event that I succeed at each individual task. And that's something that I'm still coming up with. Because out of all of them, only one of the 9 goals is its own reward. And so I'm a fencer, and I'm in a special program, and if I pass a test, which is actually coming up at the end of this month, I get a scarf which shows that I'm it's been argued what the skill level is classified as, but I kind of compare it to a black belt, even though the skill level difference is there. It's not quite a black belt, but it's well on your way, so to speak. So, whoops, I did not need that. But so in this way, I'm trying to come up with ways to just reformulate how I live, so I can be a better person not only for myself but for my son, because you know I've got him to think about too. And the biggest thing that I can do as a father is lead by example. And so that's something I've got to think about as well, because if I'm not living my best life, how can I expect him to figure out how to live his best life? Because I can't instruct him on how to do it if I haven't figured it out for myself. So the last couple of weeks have been a real interesting journey as I've really kind of challenged my own assumptions about life and trauma and how I've lived and even human psychology. And I avoided going into psychology in college because I was afraid that, well, frankly, the main reason I avoided it is because I wanted to fly, which in hindsight, because hindsight is 20/20 and we have the benefit of knowing what's going to happen, it was a fun idea, but it ultimately didn't work out for a number of reasons, not the least of which was because I was dumb, and secondly, of course, the crash happened at the same time. So, you match circumstance with stupidity and you get a catastrophic result, and that's pretty much what happened. And I'm not looking for sympathy. That's, giving you some context. The one thing about doing this in first person is it's really freaking hard to see the components we're after, because we've got to collect these stupid generator parts. But I believe that by reformulating how I live my life, I can set the example for my 11-year-old who has special needs and help him to figure himself out, which ultimately I think will be beneficial for both of us. In fact, for our whole family. So, and just so you know, I am not paid to advertise Dr. Peterson's stuff. I'm really not. I know it might sound like it sometimes. I get enthusiastic. And I'm not sorry about it. That's just the way it is. One of the other things I've started doing, and it's one of my 9 goals, is I've started writing again. And I haven't seriously written probably since... Oh, jeez. I'm trying to remember the last time I did seriously write, because the last time I really seriously put an effort into writing, it was when I was editing Ghosts of the Past, which of course went through another re-edit after it got published, and it's been pulled from publication. But it struck me, and it was another thing that's come up not only from Dr. Peterson but from a couple of other authors, the idea that by writing we really kind of let our thought processes flow out in a way that you can't otherwise do. That's one of the reasons I like doing the vlog, because I can multitask, and that's one of my problems. For some reason, as of late, and in the past I was a terrible multitasker, and maybe it's because I played a lot of this game where you can do 2 things at once frequently, or maybe it's because I'm the father to an 11-year-old where sometimes you have to do 2 things at once. But I'm almost to the point where in a lot of cases I have to multitask. When I'm at work, there are certain things that I'm doing that are kind of monotonous. I've got to have something in the background to listen to, or else I have a hard time concentrating, which, to be frank, could also be a condition of my neurological and mental state, but I haven't really had that tested, so I'm not going to even presume to know why that is. Although I'm sure that half a dozen guesses could come right off the top. I'm not the type to look at WebMD and diagnose myself with cancer. And I'm not saying that everyone who looks at WebMD does that. What I'm saying is that WebMD has a nasty habit of drawing that conclusion. It's kind of like in the television show House, where the first thing everyone thinks it is lupus all the time, and the one time that I don't, it is lupus. But anyway, that's the reason that these vlogs have always been so kind of philosophical, and yes, it's because I spend a lot of my time listening to psychology and philosophy while I'm doing other things. But I'm starting to see that, you know, one of the things I've heard often from Dr. Peterson is, you know, as human beings, we tend not to like ourselves. And at first I thought that was preposterous. And then I really looked at myself in the mirror and I'm like, no, he's actually right. Because of that, we often behave unnecessarily in unconsciously self-destructive ways. Right? Like eating bad food. And I don't mean rotten food, I mean food that's bad for us. Not paying attention to what our bodies are telling us, not engaging in self-care. You know, sometimes something as simple as ignoring the idea of brushing your teeth twice a day. Or remembering to take your meds if you need to take meds. And so I think that it's really important as I've been listening to this and kind of developing this theory in my mind, and I know a lot of it's pulled off as I need to find some other psychologists to listen to, although I think the next thing I'm going to be listening to is George Orwell's 1984, because it's really appropriate to today. I have found that by taking this really hard look at myself in the mirror, in the theoretical mirror, you know, I don't have to stare at my own image like a narcissist or anything like that, or Johnny Bravo, but kind of taking that philosophical hard look at myself in the mirror and figuring out, you know, what am I doing well for myself and what am I screwing up? And being willing to admit that I'm screwing some things up. Okay, well, now that I know I've screwed those things up, how do I make them better? For instance, I work in an office and I fence on the weekends, and fencing's a great exercise, but as I've gotten older, you know, my weight's starting to go up, and not by a lot, not by a catastrophic amount by any stretch of the imagination. And I know there are going to be people who want to reach for the screen and slap me, but in the last 10 years, I've gone from 140 to 162. And a good chunk of that's muscle mass, and I don't give myself enough credit for that, because I went from not throwing lumber on a regular basis to throwing lumber on a regular basis. And for any of you who don't know, that's one hell of a workout. Especially when you're hauling up blocked wood as opposed to split wood, because then you're hauling up chunks of trunk, unsplit rounds. And those things are damn heavy, especially when you do it for 2 to 3 hours at a time. But at the same time, I'm also slowing down, and when you're a fencer, you really need that speed. And so one of the things that I've decided to do is to fix the fact that I've become relatively slow. And I mean, part of it's because I was out of practice for over a year because of life, you know, because overall, the one thing that's never going to end is you got to put real life before you can put hobbies. And as much as I love fencing, it's a hobby, not a job. Just like as much as I hate to admit it, but if real life happened, I would have to put this down for a while and attend to things that actually qualify as, you know, dealing with family, friends, job, you know, health, if it came down to it. Now, thankfully, I know how to do the whole work-life balance and balance my hobbies. Although I'm probably just at the brink of being overloaded at this point, because that's a bad habit I've got. There we go. But honestly, all we have to do to really achieve that ability to kind of take a look at ourselves, is remember that in the end, if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't take care of anyone else. And I know this is especially hard for my generation, especially those who are very right-brained, you know, the creatives. There is no one more self-critical than someone who's creative. There really isn't, because and the reason I know this is to a certain extent, I'm creative, although I'm far more analytical than I am creative. I wish I was more creative, and that's kind of what this is this creative outlet for me. Because I can't draw, and I'm not great at reading, and you know, I can sing. I would say I'm a decent singer, but I only know a limited range of songs, and so I guess when it comes down to it, especially for the heavily right-brained people, they're the biggest self-critics, or they're the biggest critics to any artists themselves. The biggest critic to any artist of any kind is themselves. And to a certain extent, that's good, because it means that they don't allow themselves to produce crap. But I've seen beautiful things from an artist, and they say that it's crap, and I'm like, no. That's not crap. And, you know, reminding them to kind of engage in that self-care and say, you know, it's okay to step back from something you put some really solid effort into. You know, you worked hard at it for a year. It's okay for you to look at that piece of art that you created that's beautiful and say, damn, I did a good job. I did a good job. I earned myself a new set of brushes, or I earned myself that new computer to type on for the next story, or I earned that draw pad for graphics design, things of that nature. That's okay. And I mean, I know that as a whole, generationally speaking, my generation's probably the poorest one out there, so being able to afford shit like that isn't easy. But there's always a way. Or usually there's a way. I won't say there's always a way. There are some pretty shitty situations that some people are in, and I really have sympathy for them, and I wouldn't want to, you know, belittle the idea that they exist or anything like that by saying there's always a way. Well, yeah, but if that way means you're taking food off your table or taking food off someone else's table, that's not the way. So that's not what I was getting at. But usually there is a method in which you can find a way to reward yourself, even if it's small. Even if it's small. Sometimes that's all you need. And so when you accomplish something, at the very least, give yourself a compliment. Because it's hard. Sometimes even, especially for people who grapple with things like depression, anxiety, social anxiety especially. If you're an introvert and you suffer some social anxiety, it can be crippling. And some of us deal with it better than others. So if you're someone who really has a hard time with it and you manage to handle yourself in a situation that you know makes you uncomfortable, do something good for yourself. You've earned it. And I know it seems silly, and I know it seems, you know, small and things like that, but I mean, realistically, why would you treat yourself like crap over... Yeah, I mean, yeah, so an extrovert can deal with it all the time, but that's how they get their energy. If you're an introvert, that's not how you get your energy. You get your energy by being alone. Or being with your very small, very selected group of friends. And even then, you can find your friends socially exhausted. So, you know, engage in that self-care. There is nothing wrong with it. Please note, I am not a licensed psychologist. I'm not a therapist. If you are in a situation that requires one, please go seek professional help. This is just me kind of spewing thoughts out. This is how I process what I read and what I listen to, and even what I write. Because I wrote earlier today in a journal. I've decided to set up a digital journal, and it's not a public one, so I'm not going to get into what I wrote in it. But it allows me to kind of spew thoughts that have been going through my head for ages that I can't necessarily process without reading them, which happens to me quite a bit. Like I'll come up with thoughts or ideas, like when I wanted to become an Entropia Planet partner. I would still love to do it, I just know I'll never afford it, at least not in any pragmatic sense. Or let me be more accurate. At this point, I don't see it happening. I don't want to say never, because as soon as you say never, you shut the door to the possibility. But at this point, I don't see how that possibility could come to fruition, and I'm not concentrating my efforts on it. Let's put it that way. But at the same time, as I was trying to contemplate how I would do it, I would obsess over it almost. But once I wrote it down, I was able to process what I was thinking. And that also helped me to realize the thought was woefully incomplete, which is fine, because 99 things that a person's going to come up with is only going to be 2% of what you need to actually execute it. But as long as you make the effort to write it down and process the idea, it could develop or help to develop another idea. You'll take a piece of that idea and develop it into another idea. Just as an example, thought about becoming a planet partner, kind of developed that idea a certain amount of ways. And there was, I like to mess around in Unreal Engine. I do kind of aspire, I eventually want to create a game, even if it doesn't do well, even if it's only one. I do want to create a game for PC, and at some point I will do it. You know, I have access to Unreal Engine. I'm decent with Blueprint, and I'm learning C++, and I'm learning C#. And so eventually I will come up with something that would be classified as a game. Even if it's not great, it'll be complete, because that's one thing I don't want to... I hate incomplete work. Drives me crazy. Like, absolutely stark raving bonkers. But... oh, come on. You know, I can take a piece of the idea that I had from the planet partner idea I had, and I can take a piece from another idea I had that turned out to not be so great, or was too much like another a developed game, and I realized, you know, I'm coming up, you know, what if we kind of took this spin on it? And I'm like, no, it's just not enough. It's not unique enough to actually be different. And so, you know, and that's a good chunk of the creative process, where you see ideas made by other people, and you say, okay, how would I do this if I were to start from scratch and do it again? And then you think about it, is this something that we can make unique enough? And if you say no, that's not, there's nothing wrong with it. You may even begin development and say, okay, we need to dump this because there is not a unique enough selling point. There isn't a unique enough idea here to consider it its own thing. But it's part of that creative process. And so I did have an idea that I developed quite a bit. I think I had, well, of course, I'm the one who created all the puzzles, so I was able to run through it in like 15 minutes. But if you were doing it for the first time, I'd say it was probably 45 minutes of gameplay for what I had ostensibly planned on being a 2 to 3 hour game. So, you know, it's short, kind of snacky. But I was able to develop it that far because I'd taken bits and pieces of thoughts from these other ideas, and I developed it that far. And the only reason I stopped is because something catastrophic happened to the save file, which really sucked. And this is why you back shit up. But I mean, in the end, these are all kind of the things you need to remember. I completely went tangent there, and so I know I had started talking about self-care, and then I talked about the thought processes in developing ideas. You know, never feel down about yourself because you realize an idea that you have is too much like something that someone else has already come up with. It just means you don't use the idea for public consumption. You might use it as a way to kind of get the idea out on paper and away from your brain to let it process it. Because a thread from it, a piece of it that is usable in other unique properties could come up. So just keep that in mind. Okay, we're going to kind of head back now. So I guess that's all I've really got for today. I was really glad I could kind of spew that out there. I know that I kind of tangented off and we talked about self-care and treating yourself right, and dealing with those insecurities that introverts like me have, and creative people in general have. And again, like I said, I don't really think of myself as a creative person, which might be just a part of that fact that creative people don't think of themselves very creative. But as it turns out, I tend to think of myself more logical, and I have a creative bent, but not necessarily as creative as someone who's, for lack of a better term, well, as an artist, right? So, but anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe down below. Make sure you hit the notification bell too. That way you know what and when I'm releasing things. I keep to a regular schedule, and I'm 7 days a week now, and everything releases at 9, but that could change in the future. And I really enjoy the fact that my subscriber count is slowly growing, and we're slowly building a community, and my hope is that we can build that community over time. And in the event that, like, if you post a comment and I make a comment back as a disagreement, because there was one, my Merry Mayhem post or video garnered some debate, and I debated back, and that's because that's what I do. I wasn't doing that to be combative against the person who was commenting. I was really looking to start a conversation. As my buddy Mike can tell you, that's one of the things that I really enjoy doing. Is if I disagree with you, I want to know why you think the way you think, and at the same time, I want you to understand where I'm coming from, so that we can have that kind of debate. So if you do post on my comment, and I post a comment of disagreement, please by all means disagree back. Remain civil, but that's part of the discourse. Engage in that debate, because I really enjoy that. And you don't get a lot of good, spirited but civil debate these days. And honestly, I think we're worse off for it. So again, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. You all have a wonderful weekend and a great night.